A lone rancher finds an Apache slave in the desert and never imagines that she will stay with him. The desert was vast and silent, stretching endlessly under the blazing sun. The air shimmered with heat, and the sand reflected a golden light that seemed to stretch to the horizon. Ethan rode slowly on his horse, feeling the familiar crunch of dry earth beneath his boots. He had spent most of his life on this land, tending to his small ranch and living alone, far from towns and neighbors. The desert was harsh, but it was honest. It demanded work, patience, and respect, and it gave back only to those willing to understand it. For Ethan, the solitude was comforting. There were no complicated relationships, no city noise, no endless demands. Just him, the land, and his animals. As he checked the water wells, Ethan's sharp eyes scanned the horizon. He had noticed strange tracks earlier in the week, and something about them had caught his attention. They were faint, half covered by sand, but clearly the marks of someone or something that had struggled through the desert. He had grown used to noticing details that others might overlook. The way a bush leaned slightly to one side, the broken twig that hinted at movement, the faint scent carried by the wind. Today, the tracks seemed fresher, and they drew him to a dry riverbed that wound like a silver ribbon through the otherwise empty land. Ethan dismounted, tying his horse to a nearby cactus. He stepped carefully, the dry earth crunching under his boots. He noticed broken branches and footprints that were too small to be his own. Something was there, something human. His heart beat a little faster, but not from fear. He had faced storms, rattlesnakes, and the occasional desert thief. No, this was different. There was a sense of urgency in the tracks, a story of struggle and exhaustion written in the sand. He followed them, moving slowly and deliberately. It was then he saw her. She was barely moving, almost hidden behind a small rock. Her clothes were torn, dusty, and hung loosely on her small frame. Her skin was sunburned and scratched from thorns and stones, and her dark hair clung to her face with sweat. She was leaning against the rock, her breathing shallow, her eyes barely open. Ethan froze for a moment. He had never seen anyone in such a state of exhaustion and despair. His first instinct was caution, but his second was compassion. He stepped closer, keeping his voice low and gentle. "Hey, are you all right?" he asked, though he knew she might not answer. The woman's eyes flickered open. They were dark and wary, filled with a mixture of fear and disbelief. She didn't speak. She only looked at him, and in her gaze, Ethan saw the story of a life that had been difficult, a life full of fear and suffering. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out beneath her. He moved quickly to steady her, putting a hand on her arm to keep her from falling. "You need water," he said simply, reaching into his pack for a canteen. He held it out to her. She hesitated, glancing around as if expecting someone else to appear, but the desert was empty. Finally, with trembling hands, she accepted the canteen and drank greedily. Ethan watched silently, giving her the time and space she needed. He had learned long ago that patience was often the most important tool a person could have. Once she had recovered slightly, Ethan helped her to his horse. He didn't insist on words or explanations. She could tell him her story when she was ready. For now she needed rest, water, and shelter. The ride back to the ranch was slow. The woman, whom he would later learn was named Naomi, clung to the horse, leaning against him for support. Her body was small, fragile, and exhausted, yet there was a quiet strength in her eyes, a resilience that suggested she had survived far worse than a day in the desert. When they arrived at the ranch, Ethan led the horse to the stable and guided Naomi inside. The ranch was modest, a small wooden house, a barn with a few horses and cattle, and a yard dotted with water troughs and feeding areas. It wasn't much, but it was safe, and it was clean. Ethan showed Naomi a small cot near the fireplace and offered her a blanket. She accepted silently, curling up and letting her body relax for the first time in what must have been weeks. Ethan prepared a simple meal of bread, stew, and water. He ate while keeping a careful eye on her. Naomi ate slowly, hesitating as if she was not used to being treated with kindness. Ethan didn't press her. He knew she needed to feel in control, to have the choice to accept help. In the quiet of the evening, the two sat in the soft glow of the fire. Ethan's mind wandered as he watched her eat, wondering about her past, the hardships she had faced, and how someone so young could survive alone in such a harsh world. As night fell, the desert became colder. The wind carried a dry chill that swept through the ranch. Ethan stoked the fire and offered Naomi more blankets. She shook her head slightly but eventually accepted. He could see the tension in her shoulders ease, little by little. For the first time since he had found her, she allowed herself a moment of peace. Ethan respected the silence between them. Words were not necessary. Sometimes, survival was a shared experience rather than a conversation. In the days that followed, Ethan continued his routine, but now with Naomi at his side. He brought her water, helped her bathe, and offered small meals throughout the day. Naomi began to regain strength, moving more confidently and exploring the ranch cautiously. She stayed mostly quiet, observing the animals, the land, and Ethan's work. Occasionally she would glance at him, a faint expression of curiosity or acknowledgement, but she did not speak much. Ethan understood trust was not given freely, and he was prepared to wait. Over time, small signs of trust began to appear. Naomi accepted food without hesitation, followed him on short walks across the property, and even helped with light chores. She was careful, methodical, and attentive, her hands skilled and precise despite their rough condition from the desert. Ethan could see the spark of her personality emerging, a gentle but resilient spirit that had endured hardship and survived. He found himself admiring her quiet determination, her patience, and the strength that lay beneath her fragile appearance. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the desert sky in shades of red and gold, Naomi finally spoke. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, but it carried weight. "Thank you," she said, her eyes meeting his, "for helping me." Ethan nodded, a small smile on his face. "You're welcome," he replied simply. "You're safe here, that's all that matters." The moment was small but significant. It marked the beginning of a connection that would grow slowly, rooted in trust, patience, and shared experience. Ethan knew he had not yet earned her full confidence, and Naomi knew she still had a long way to go before she could fully relax. But in that quiet desert evening, amidst the sounds of the wind and the crackle of the fire, a fragile bond had begun. A bond that neither of them could have predicted, but one that would shape the days to come. The desert remained vast, endless, and unforgiving, but within Ethan's small ranch, there was a new presence, a quiet promise of change. The rancher who had lived alone for so long now had a companion, a human connection that brought both hope and responsibility. And the young woman who had endured so much had found a place of safety, a temporary home where she could begin to heal. The future was uncertain, as it always was in the desert, but for the first time in many months, both Ethan and Naomi felt the faint warmth of trust, a light that promised the possibility of something more. The days at the ranch passed slowly, marked by the rhythm of chores and the ever-present sun that rose over the desert each morning. Ethan moved through his routine with quiet precision, feeding the horses, checking the water wells, repairing fences, and tending to the small vegetable patch he had carefully cultivated. Naomi watched him at first, standing at the edge of the yard, her eyes following each movement with quiet curiosity. She said little, but her presence was noticeable, like a shadow learning to match the pace of someone else's life. Ethan noticed her watching, and he didn't mind. He understood that trust could not be rushed. Instead, he continued his work, occasionally glancing at her and offering small gestures, a nod, a smile, or a simple question about whether she was hungry. Naomi responded in her own way, sometimes with a quiet hum or a faint nod, but rarely with words. Her silence was not rudeness, it was caution, a shield that had been necessary for survival. Ethan respected that. He knew that someone who had endured what she had would not easily allow themselves to be vulnerable. After a few days, he began to involve Naomi in small tasks around the ranch. He showed her how to sweep the barn floor, feed the chickens, and carry water to the animals. She was cautious at first, moving carefully as though afraid of making mistakes, but she was a quick learner. Her movements were deliberate and precise, reflecting a mind that had learned to survive through careful observation and attention to detail. Ethan noticed this skill immediately. Naomi was quiet, but she had a sharpness that he admired, a keen understanding of the land, the animals, and the rhythms of life that he sometimes took for granted. As Naomi grew stronger, she started exploring more of the ranch on her own. She would follow the horses as they grazed, run her fingers through the soft mane, and watch the birds that came to drink from the water troughs. She seemed to have an innate connection with the animals, understanding them in ways that Ethan could not explain. She could sense when a horse was anxious or when a chicken was about to lay an egg, and she adjusted her actions accordingly. Ethan often found himself smiling quietly at her careful attentions, realizing that she brought a new life to his quiet ranch. One afternoon, Ethan noticed Naomi sitting on a small rock near the edge of the property, staring at the desert horizon. The sun was high, casting long shadows across the sand and rocks, and the air shimmered with heat. He approached her slowly, not wanting to startle her. "You've been quiet today," he said gently. Naomi turned her head and looked at him, her dark eyes thoughtful. "I like to watch," she said softly. Her voice was still quiet, but it carried a new confidence. "The desert, it is alive. It moves and changes." Ethan nodded. "Yes. It can be harsh, but it teaches you things. You've learned quickly." She smiled faintly, a small gesture that spoke volumes. It was the first time she had shown a hint of amusement or warmth. Ethan felt a surge of hope. Perhaps the trust between them was slowly growing. As the days turned into weeks, their routines began to intertwine. Naomi helped Ethan with daily chores, and in return, he taught her more about the ranch, how to mend fences, identify plants that could be eaten, and track animals that might wander too far. Their work together was quiet, often without conversation, but it built a subtle understanding between them. They did not need many words. The shared labor and presence were enough. However, the desert was not always kind. One evening, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and a sudden storm swept across the land. Strong winds whipped the sand into the air, and heavy rain began to fall, soaking the parched earth. Ethan rushed to secure the animals and cover the supplies. Naomi followed without hesitation, carrying buckets of water back and forth to prevent the barn from flooding. She worked with determination, showing a resilience that matched Ethan's own. After the storm passed, they stood outside, looking at the desert as it glistened with fresh rain. Naomi turned to Ethan and spoke quietly. "I have never seen it like this. The land, it can be cruel but also beautiful." Ethan smiled, recognizing the significance of her words. She was beginning to see the desert not just as a place of survival, but as a home that demanded respect and understanding. "It is beautiful," he agreed, "and it can teach you patience." The growing trust between them began to show in smaller, more personal moments. Naomi started to share pieces of her past, not the darkest parts, but enough to let Ethan understand her journey. She spoke of her family, the land she had known, and the people she had lost. She spoke carefully, choosing her words with thought, as if she were testing whether Ethan would judge her or dismiss her. Ethan listened quietly, never interrupting, offering only the comfort of his attention and presence. One afternoon, Naomi found a small stream near the edge of the ranch. She knelt by the water, cupping her hands to drink, and Ethan joined her. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the gentle trickle of the water and the distant calls of birds. Then Naomi spoke, her voice soft but certain. "I never thought anyone would help me," she said. "I thought people like me, we are always alone." Ethan looked at her, understanding the weight of her words. "You're not alone anymore," he said simply, "and you don't have to be." Her eyes glistened with a mix of emotion, relief, gratitude, and something deeper she could not yet name. She did not speak again for several moments, letting the words settle between them like a bridge slowly forming. As the weeks passed, Naomi's presence at the ranch became more comfortable, more natural. She began to smile more often, and occasionally she would laugh, a soft, melodic sound that brought a warmth to Ethan's heart he had not felt in years. He realized that her laughter was not just a reaction to something amusing, but a sign of her growing sense of security, of a slowly forming trust that he had worked hard to earn. Despite the small comforts of their daily lives, the desert still posed challenges. Supplies ran low at times, and the isolation meant that any illness or injury could become dangerous. Yet, through each challenge, Ethan and Naomi learned to rely on one another. She learned to anticipate his needs, and he learned to understand her quiet signals, a glance, a gesture, a shift in posture that communicated more than words ever could. Their bond deepened, not through declarations, but through shared experience and unspoken understanding. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Ethan and Naomi sat outside the ranch house. The air was warm, carrying the scent of dry earth and blooming desert flowers. Naomi leaned back on her hands, looking at the horizon with thoughtful eyes. "I think I like it here," she said softly. "It is quiet but not empty. I feel safe." Ethan nodded, feeling a quiet satisfaction. "You are safe," he said, "and you always will be here. As long as you want." She turned her gaze toward him, a small but genuine smile on her face. For the first time, Ethan felt that the trust he had been nurturing was no longer fragile. It was real, and it was mutual. The desert, with all its hardships and beauty, had brought them together. What had begun as a chance encounter had grown into a quiet partnership, a bond that neither of them had anticipated but both had come to rely on. The night settled over the desert, cool and serene. The stars emerged one by one, glittering like tiny lights scattered across a dark canvas. Ethan watched Naomi as she sat quietly, her expression calm and contemplative. He realized that she had changed, just as he had. They were both learning, adapting, and growing, not just as individuals but together. The desert, harsh as it was, had become a place of healing, of trust, and of slowly forming companionship. And though their journey was just beginning, both of them knew that the bond they were building was strong enough to face whatever challenges lay ahead. In the vast silence of the desert, the ranch no longer felt lonely, and the young woman no longer felt lost. Together, they were learning the language of trust, the rhythm of cooperation, and the quiet power of human connection. The days stretched before them, full of work, discovery, and the subtle joy of finding someone who could share the burdens and the beauty of life in the desert. Life on the ranch continued with the quiet rhythm of desert days, but it was no longer a solitary routine for Ethan. Naomi had become an essential presence, moving with purpose and confidence, helping him with chores and learning the delicate balance of living in such a harsh environment. Each day brought new challenges, yet each day also revealed new strengths in both of them. They worked side by side, their movements coordinated without much need for words. The ranch, once a place of solitude, had become a place of shared life. One morning, as the first light of dawn painted the desert in soft shades of pink and gold, Ethan noticed Naomi kneeling near the garden, examining the small crops. She had been tending to the vegetables carefully, her hands moving over the leaves with a gentle, practiced touch. She looked up at him and smiled, The plants, they grow faster with water, she said simply, and care. Ethan chuckled softly, appreciating her quiet wisdom. Yes, he said, everything in the desert needs attention. Even the smallest things, if you ignore them, they wither. Naomi nodded, her gaze thoughtful. I have learned, she said, even in the desert life finds a way. Her words struck Ethan with their simple truth. She had endured hardships he could barely imagine, yet here she was, observing life, tending to it, and understanding it in ways he sometimes overlooked. He realized that her presence had not only brought companionship but also a new perspective, one that encouraged him to see the ranch and life itself in a more patient, attentive way. As the morning wore on, the work grew heavier. A fence had been damaged in the previous night's wind, and Ethan set to repair it immediately. Naomi followed him, carrying the tools he needed. Together they worked efficiently, their movements in sync. She learned quickly how to secure the posts, tighten the wire, and repair the wooden boards. Ethan was impressed not just by her skill but by her determination. She worked tirelessly, never complaining, even when the sun beat down on them mercilessly. While they worked, Naomi shared fragments of her past. She spoke cautiously, revealing only what she felt safe sharing. My family, they were taken, she said quietly, her voice steady but tinged with sorrow. I escaped, I had to run. Ethan listened attentively, offering no interruptions, just his presence. He understood that she needed to tell her story on her own terms. You were brave, he said finally, to survive, to keep going. Naomi's eyes softened and she nodded. I had no choice, she said. But it is hard to trust. Ethan did not respond immediately. He knew the weight of her words. Trust, once broken, was difficult to rebuild, especially for someone who had endured pain and betrayal. He simply continued the work, allowing his actions to speak for him, steady, reliable, and patient. The afternoon brought another challenge. A wandering coyote had come close to the livestock, and Ethan had to chase it off to protect the animals. Naomi followed at a distance, observing how he handled the situation with care and efficiency. When the coyote finally ran off, Naomi approached him, her expression a mix of curiosity and admiration. You protect everything here, she said, even the animals. Ethan nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. Yes, this land, these animals, they depend on care, and so do we in a way. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment, thoughtful, and then she said nothing more. Yet the simple exchange strengthened the quiet bond between them. Naomi was beginning to see that Ethan's kindness was not limited to her. It extended to every living thing under his care. And Ethan, in turn, appreciated her attentiveness and empathy, her ability to see and respond to life in a gentle, deliberate way. As the days passed, Naomi began to take more initiative around the ranch. She would fetch water for the animals without being asked, tend to the garden, and even help mend small tools. Her presence was no longer that of a guest or a dependent. It was that of a partner, someone who contributed meaningfully to the life they shared. Ethan noticed the change, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. He had never imagined that a chance encounter in the desert could grow into something so essential, so real. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat outside the ranch house, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The sky was a brilliant canvas of orange, pink, and purple, and the desert seemed to glow in the fading light. Naomi leaned back on her hands, her face calm and relaxed. I like the evenings, she said softly. The desert, it is quiet but not empty. I can think here. Ethan nodded. Yes, it gives you space to think, to breathe. There was a pause, a shared silence that felt comfortable rather than awkward. Naomi glanced at him, her expression contemplative. I am learning to trust, she said quietly. Not everything, but some things. Ethan smiled gently. Trust is built slowly. It cannot be rushed. Her smile was faint but genuine, and for a moment the hardships she had endured seemed to lift from her shoulders. She was beginning to understand that she did not have to be alone, that someone could care for her without asking for anything in return. And Ethan realized that he, too, was learning about patience, empathy, and the quiet strength of someone who had survived so much and still chose to live fully. Life on the ranch was not without difficulties. Supplies sometimes ran low, storms occasionally swept through the land, and the isolation meant that every decision carried weight. Yet these challenges no longer felt overwhelming. With Naomi by his side, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. They faced the hardships together, learning to anticipate one another's needs, communicate without words, and support each other through the unpredictability of the desert. One day, while checking the perimeter of the ranch, they encountered signs of outsiders, footprints near the edge of the property. Ethan's instincts kicked in immediately. He guided Naomi to a safe spot, keeping a close watch on the surroundings. Together they observed the movements, careful and silent. Naomi's attention to detail amazed him. She could notice things he might have missed, the subtle shifts in the sand, the faint disturbances in the bushes. After the danger passed, Naomi spoke quietly. "You always know what to do," she said, "even when it is scary." Ethan shrugged, smiling modestly. "Experience, and sometimes paying attention." Her eyes met his, and for the first time he saw a mixture of admiration and gratitude. It was a look that spoke louder than words, a recognition of his reliability and care. He realized that Naomi's trust in him was growing, not just because he offered safety, but because he had proven, day after day, that he could be counted on. As the sun set that evening, they worked together to feed the animals, tending to each creature with care. Naomi moved with confidence now, her hands steady and precise. Ethan watched her, feeling a deep sense of respect and admiration. She had endured so much, yet she remained strong, compassionate, and willing to embrace life once more. Later, as they sat near the fire, Naomi finally shared a small story from her past. She spoke of her childhood, of the land where she had grown up, and the family she had lost. She spoke cautiously, choosing each word with care, but her voice carried a quiet strength. Ethan listened, absorbing her words without interruption. He understood that these stories were not just memories, they were pieces of her identity, fragments of a life she had fought to survive and preserve. "You have been through so much," Ethan said softly, "and yet you still find strength. That is remarkable." Naomi looked at him, her eyes thoughtful. I had no choice," she replied. "But I am learning that not everyone is cruel, not everyone will hurt you." Ethan nodded. "No, not everyone, and sometimes people show kindness in ways you don't expect." The quiet desert night stretched around them, stars glittering overhead like scattered jewels. The fire crackled gently, casting a warm glow on their faces. In that moment there was no fear, no past trauma, only the simple, profound connection between two people learning to trust, to care, and to rely on one another. By the end of part 3, Ethan and Naomi had grown closer, their bond strengthened by shared work, mutual respect, and small acts of kindness. They faced challenges together, learned from one another, and began to form a deep understanding that would carry them through the days ahead. The desert, once a place of solitude and danger, had become a place of growth, learning, and slowly forming partnership. Life on the ranch had settled into a quiet rhythm, but the calm was not permanent. The desert, with all its vastness and unpredictability, had a way of reminding people that nothing stayed simple for long. For Ethan and Naomi, the days were still filled with work, learning, and growing trust. But beneath the surface, both of them were beginning to feel the stirrings of questions that had been buried for a long time. Naomi, especially, was confronting thoughts that she had tried to ignore, memories of her past, the people she had lost, and the world that existed beyond the ranch. One morning, Naomi was tending to the garden when she noticed something unusual on the horizon. Dust clouds were rising in the distance, the telltale sign that someone or a group was approaching. Ethan, who had also seen the movement, quickly assessed the situation. "Stay inside for now," he said calmly, though his mind was alert. He moved to prepare the animals and secure the ranch. Naomi watched silently, her hands trembling slightly as a mixture of fear and curiosity ran through her. When the visitors arrived, they were not strangers. A small group of Apache scouts had come into the area, looking for survivors from the scattered tribes, people who had escaped capture or slavery. Among them, Naomi recognized a familiar figure, a woman she had known in her youth, someone who had survived alongside her family before they had been taken. Naomi's heart raced. She had never expected to see anyone from her past again, and the sudden presence of these people stirred emotions she had buried for years: hope, fear, longing, and uncertainty. Ethan noticed the change in her immediately. Naomi stiffened, her gaze fixed on the newcomers, and he could sense the conflict within her. He said nothing, simply watching as she weighed her options. He knew that she had a choice to make, a choice between reconnecting with her past and staying in the safety and trust she had begun to build at the ranch. After a few moments, Naomi stepped forward cautiously. She spoke with her old acquaintance, her voice quiet but filled with emotion. She learned that some of her people had survived, that they had formed a small community, and that they were looking for others to join them. The thought of returning to her people was tempting. It was a connection she had lost for so long, a part of herself that had been taken away. But the memories of what she had endured with other humans, the fear, the pain, the betrayal, made her hesitate. Ethan approached her slowly. He could see the turmoil in her eyes and felt a quiet ache in his chest. "You don't have to decide right now," he said gently. "Think about what you want. No one can force you." Naomi nodded, grateful for his understanding. She knew he was right. She had to make this decision for herself, and rushing it would only lead to regret. That evening, she walked to the edge of the property, sitting on a rock and looking at the desert stretched out before her. The sky was painted with the colors of sunset, brilliant and deep, and the wind carried the scent of distant sage and earth. She thought of her family, of the life she had lost, and of the possibility of rebuilding a connection with her people. And yet she also thought of Ethan, the man who had given her safety, care, and trust when she had needed it most. For the first time in a long while, Naomi allowed herself to feel uncertain. She realized that life was not simply a matter of choosing between right and wrong, or safe and dangerous. It was about belonging, about finding a place where she could be herself without fear. The ranch, with its quiet routines, the animals, and the desert itself, had become a sanctuary. Ethan had never asked her to repay him, never demanded her trust or loyalty. He had simply offered her a place where she could be free to choose. Over the next few days, Naomi spent long hours thinking and observing. She helped Ethan with chores, tending to the animals and working in the garden, but her mind often wandered to the thought of her people. She wondered what life would be like with them, whether she would feel a true sense of belonging, or if she would be constantly reminded of the trauma she had endured. She also wondered about the bond she had begun to form with Ethan, a quiet but undeniable connection that had grown from shared labor, trust, and mutual respect. Ethan, sensing her inner struggle, did not pressure her. He continued his work on the ranch, moving alongside her in silence, offering support when needed. He knew that trust was built over time, but choice was even more important. He had already given her freedom, and now she had to decide how she would live with it. He admired her strength, the way she wrestled with her past without letting it consume her, and the courage she showed simply by considering the possibilities before her. One afternoon, Naomi ventured beyond the ranch boundary, walking along the edge of the desert where the land dropped into a small canyon. She paused to look down at the dry riverbed below, reflecting on her life. Memories came unbidden, her family, the capture, the harshness she had endured, and the people who had sought to control her. She realized that those memories had shaped her, yes, but they did not have to define her. She had survived. She had learned. And now she had the chance to choose her own path. When she returned to the ranch, she found Ethan waiting near the barn, watching the sky as the sun began to set. She approached him cautiously. "I have thought," she said softly, her voice steady but reflective. "I could go with them to my people. I could rebuild some part of what I lost, but I also feel something here, a peace I have not felt in years." Ethan listened, his expression calm and understanding. "Then the choice is yours," he said simply. "Whatever you decide, it is the right choice if it comes from your heart." Naomi looked at him, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She realized that her feelings for Ethan were not the same as the connection to her past. That bond was about family, history, and survival. What she felt for Ethan was something new: trust, respect, and perhaps the beginnings of companionship. She knew that she could not fully explain it yet, but she understood that it mattered just as much. The next morning, Naomi spoke to the group of Apache people who had come searching. She thanked them for finding her and shared that she appreciated their offer, but she needed more time before she could decide about returning. She explained that she had found a place where she felt safe and that she wanted to explore what that meant. The group respected her decision, understanding that her choice had to be her own. They promised to leave supplies nearby in case she changed her mind, then departed quietly, leaving the desert once again empty except for the two people who had found each other. In the days that followed, Naomi felt a sense of relief and clarity. She realized that she had made the choice to stay, not out of obligation, but because she wanted to. The ranch had become more than a shelter. It had become a place where she could breathe, heal, and begin to trust in a way she had never done before. Ethan had not demanded anything from her, yet he had given her the most important gift of all: respect and freedom. Ethan, too, felt a quiet satisfaction. He had not expected to feel such attachment to someone who had appeared so suddenly in his life. Yet Naomi's presence had changed the ranch, and him, in ways he could not have imagined. Her resilience, her thoughtfulness, and her quiet strength had brought warmth and life into the solitude he had once cherished. As the sun set one evening, painting the desert sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Ethan and Naomi sat together outside the ranch house. Naomi's face was calm, her eyes reflective but serene. "I have decided," she said quietly. "I will stay for now. I need to see what this place can be for me, and I want to learn to trust fully." Ethan nodded, a small, genuine smile spreading across his face. "Then you are welcome," he said softly, "and I will respect your pace always." Naomi returned the smile, feeling a lightness she had not experienced in years. For the first time, she felt that she was truly free, not just from her past, but free to choose her own future. And in that freedom, she found the courage to begin imagining a life filled with trust, companionship, and perhaps even joy. The desert, harsh and unforgiving, stretched endlessly around them, yet it no longer felt empty. It had become a place of possibility, a land where two people, each shaped by loss and survival, could come together to create something new. As the night fell and the stars appeared, Naomi and Ethan sat quietly, side by side, knowing that the days ahead would bring challenges, but also a chance to build a life based on respect, care, and choice. And in that quiet moment, both of them understood something important. That belonging was not about the past or fear of loss, but about the courage to trust, to choose, and to allow oneself to be part of something meaningful. The bond they were forming was not simple, but it was real, and it was just beginning to grow.